Here we are again, another community monthly virtual meetup. I can't already with the chats. We have hundreds of folks joining us live all across the globe to another community virtual meetup. And today it is our data science team takeover. We couldn't be more excited to welcome the data science team. We've got data scientists raising the roof. I think that's what they called it in the 90s. We have some of my folks over here, Mark Booth, Anna Yardley below me, be manning the chat and all of the things as your comments and questions come through. And we have a special guest from the Michael J. Fox Foundation. Kifan, thank you so much for joining us. We have so much to get to. But first, a little housekeeping, a little agenda. Let's talk a little bit about what's going to be happening today during our community monthly meetup. Obviously, I'm the Director of Community Strategy here at Domo, Eddie Small. I am your host and MC for these events. And we are going to be talking how to create composite measures using data reduction techniques. Now, as I've already suggested, our data science team is taking this thing all over with Christy, Shelby, and Florencia. Thank you guys so much for joining. And our special guest, Kifan, who is the Director of Revenue Analytics at the Michael J. Fox Foundation. Obviously, this is just a culmination of a lot of work that's being done in our communities to make sure you feel supported and connected as a user base of our products. Tons of live streams, obviously these monthly meetups. We've got community blogs. In fact, I've changed the picture of our live streams to Anna and I. We just recently did a 5 things to be successful in the community today video. It's very short. I recommend you give it a watch. It's extremely exciting to kind of find out what that rebirth and rebrand of community has looked like here at Domo since Domo Palooza. Holy cow. Hello from Israel. This thing has gone global, and we're excited everyone here is obviously joining us. Now, before we get started, I would be apropos without announcing our next community meetup. We are going to be doing a deep dive into beast modes, data sets, and ETL with our friends Zach Cameron and Michael Christensen here from Domo. And then our customer that will be joining us is Mark Snodgrass. So we're super excited to join them. As always, the only way to get engaged and connect with our hosts and our guests, as well as other folks in the community, is to jump into that live chat, jump into that comment section, ask your questions, and connect with us, because we will be picking a few of those most engaged users of this session to win custom Domo AirPods Pro. That's right, custom Domo AirPods Pro. Let me get out of this so you can see our faces again. Hello, Mark and Anna. Are we ready? This is like gladiators ready. I got to get them out of the room so I can announce our host and get them started. Are we good to go? Do you feel confident? I love it. Thumbs up. This is where I get to actually physically remove my boss from a meeting. Watch this. There he goes. And there is the only person that matters, Anna Yardley. She's gone as well. But here I am with our data science team and our guest, Kifan. Appreciate you guys so much for joining. Excited to get started. I know we have a number of things, and you guys have a number of members also backstage helping in the chat. So this is an all-in session for those of us that are joining. Florencia, I think I'm passing it over to Christy, right? Christy will be our first presenter here. Kifan, you will be backstage, as they like to call it. I'm going to go ahead and ship you that way so that she's not like me, where we're just staring at the screen smiling the whole time. So it's time for us to talk. So I'm going to hand it over to Christy, and then we'll share your presentation, and we're ready to rock and roll. Thank you guys again.
All right. Oh, welcome, everybody. While Flo gets our presentation pulled up here, just a brief introduction. We are members of the Domo Data Science Professional Services team. We wanted to share with you some of our most common use cases that we see. And the one that we're going to focus on today is composite measures. That's really a data technique. I just threw a whole bunch of really big words at you, so we're going to explain them all throughout the presentation today. And I want to let you know that this is a use case that almost every single person wanting to do analytics and or data science could use. There are really simple versions of it. There are really complicated versions of it. So we'll talk about that throughout the presentation today. And So if we go to the next slide, our first thing that we want to talk about, who are we? Again, professional services team at Domo. I lead the team. I have a few people on my team. I'm joined with our other PhDs today, Flo and Shelby. Flo is a PhD candidate. You're going to be a PhD very soon, Flo. Yes.
Manifest for me.
We together have about 25 years of experience, and our team spans the business spectrum. So we are not specialized in any one industry or any type of use cases. We span the spectrum of what they are. We hire very diversely. So we have a lot of diverse data scientists on our team. If you've had the opportunity to work with us, we have matched talent to your use case. And if you haven't, we hope that you will have the chance to work with us in the future. Following that, what do? We do a lot of things, and there are many things that I'm excited to introduce to you today. I don't a lot of people know about some of the things we do. We do the typical stuff, the typical consulting things. We build production MSM or DSML and AI solutions. We also do data strategy engagements where maybe you don't know where to go next with all of your data. You're using Domo, you know you can do more, you want to do more. We can come in and help with that. We also do teaching and training sessions. So if that's something you're interested in, reach out. We support data science more globally at Domo. And one way we do that is through office hours. So if you're interested in office hours with my team, reach by appointment. We also sponsor lunch and learns like this one. We do them typically the first Thursday every month. And if you want to see us talk about a certain topic during one of those lunch and learns, let us know in the chat. We want to hear from you, and we want to deliver what you want to see. So please let us know. All right. So that's enough about us. Back to composite scores. So first, I want to frame the problem. Like, why do we need composite scores? Why do we care about them? Well, they address a really common data problem. Maybe 20 years ago, people had the problem of not having enough data. Today, we almost have the opposite problem of having too much data, so much that we maybe don't even know how to deal with it. So let's think about the example of store performance, just to make it a little more hands-on. You can imagine if you're a fast food restaurant owner of a chain, and you want to benchmark store performance against all of the stores, across all of the stores, to find the high-performing stores. Well, a lot of people want to have a say in that. So you could imagine maybe a more rural chain or a more rural store location having really, really great customer feedback. They love the store, really good feedback from the employees. They might even have really loyal long-term employees, but maybe their revenues are not as high. You might have the opposite issue in a more urban setting, really, really busy setting where you've got high turnover. Maybe the service isn't as great, but there's a whole bunch of volume that rolls through there. And then you've got everything in between that. So how do you benchmark these stores together across all of the many, 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 many measures that you could think about, including in store performance, and make it fair for all of the stores and useful for your executives so that they know what the top performing stores are and they know why they're top performing? Right? How do you do that? When we have done this use case, we've seen data sets with literally hundreds of columns that are intended to describe store performance. So we've thrown up a handful of them on the screen here. So it might be foot traffic, it might be transaction value, it might be customer retention, it might be sales growth, it might be customer satisfaction. It could be a whole bunch of things. So what do you do with this? And, you know, the analyst in me and the analyst in all of us usually says, well, we need to look at those things individually. And that's great. That's a really great way to go. But then what do you do? Because that's a lot of things to put on a dashboard, and it's too many to start benchmarking stores against each other. So what do you do? So let's go forward and talk about data reduction or composite scores as a way to solve that problem. So what is a composite score? A composite score is a single indicator that represents a combination of information from multiple variables or subscores. So let's think about that. You have a whole bunch of columns of data that describe store performance, and we want to boil it down into one indicator that we can use, and we can benchmark scores across each other. So how do you do that? Well, this is one way to think about it, and we like to call this a map. You can see we've grouped all of these different ideas, like sales per employee, conversion rate, et cetera. That might be a subscore that defines sales. We might have another score that defines profit, another one related to inventory. But basically what we're saying is that all of these columns of data have some kind of dimensionality to them. So there are ideas that the scores cluster around, or the columns of data cluster around. So some of them might be clustered around sales, some of them might be clustered around growth. They could be clustered in a whole bunch of different ways, and you can discover those clusters mathematically through things like factor analysis. That's the more data science version of that. You can cluster them theoretically. So what does your business think measures a similar construct, and you can put those together. And then you can join those in subscores, and then maybe even one master composite score, which is the process that we've shown here. So we're taking columns of data, clustering them, and then further clustering them together and weighting them so that they make sense for our business in a single indicator. You might also feel like one single indicator is not enough variation or not enough information, so you might want to just use subscores instead. Totally fine, but it's all data reduction and it's all composite scoring. I will not bore you with all of the math behind factor analysis and other sorts of things, but you can do this in a simple way with addition, subtraction, multiplication, or you can do it with the more mathematical and the more behavioral science focused techniques, including factor analysis and other sorts of things. So composite scores inherently lead to data reduction. So you're taking, this is a little teeny tiny mock data set, but you're taking for example, store performance, a receipt ID, and you're including all of the information that you might have regarding that one store visit, and you're synthesizing that down into one column of data. So you're taking lots and lots and lots of columns and synthesizing that down into one. So it reduces the number of variables and measures that are necessary in subsequent analysis. So this is a lot easier to look at on a dashboard than trying to parse through hundreds of different indicators that you have to kind of navigate and put together in your brain, which is a hard task for a lot of people to do. So this makes it really easy. And you can build those scores in ways that are relevant to your business goals. You can weight them in ways that are relevant to your business logic or your goals, or however you want to structure those. So you have a lot of control over how those are built. You also can create a lot of documentation around that. So when people want to know how they're benchmarked or how they're measured, you can very easily tell them. Flo is going to give us an example later of how we've done this for a number of our customers. And then, of course, Ifan will talk about her experience in using composite scores later on in the presentation. So it's good for you guys to see a real customer who we've worked with to talk about creating composite scores and using this data reduction approach, and even understanding what that means for a business and how synthesizing lots and lots and lots of columns makes base analytics easier. And it also makes data science easier if you want to move forward with that. So if we go on to the next slide, you can imagine that there are a lot of advantages to creating composite scoring. They are up here. I'll hit a couple of the highlights, but I'll let you read them too. First of all, it just makes analysis so much easier, and drawing conclusions from data so much simpler when you're looking at a handful of metrics that are synthesized rather than raw data that might equal 100 different data points or 100 different types of data that you're looking at to create benchmarks. So that it just makes your life easier in a lot of ways. It's more interpretable. It streamlines your dashboards and figures. I've actually seen companies who needed a composite score They weren't quite sure how to do one. And so instead of creating a composite score, they just created 50 identical dashboards so that they could identify and look at the 50 different dimensions of those measures that they want. And that's so hard. It's so time intensive. And then it's frustrating because you get all the data and then you still don't know what to do with it. So that's what we're trying to solve for. You can also fully customize these so that it makes sense for your business. You don't have to let math tell you what to do. We actually think that data science works absolutely the best when it is informed by business logic and goals, so that it's interpretable and you can make sense of it. And best of all, it really simplifies things for analytics and then data science. So this is what we call feature engineering when we're building a model. This is really advanced feature engineering, but it's so beneficial in a lot of ways. And that's one of the reasons we want to focus on it today. So let's go on to the next slide. What can you do with them? These are the use cases we see. Company employee performance. You might have 20 different items. Well, what do you do with them? How do you synthesize them? Is an average good enough, or are there different dimensions? Is there dimensionality in how you want to look at that? And do you weigh some things heavier than others? So that's a really good one. Same thing with customer engagement. Marketing or fundraising campaigns can undergo a process like this too. Customer satisfaction, job candidate ratings, risk assessment, and the sky's the limit. You can do a lot with composite scoring.
Hey, Christy. Sorry, I'm jumping in here, and I'm also I'm also covering up Shelby, as typically is the case when we try to do comments on this platform. But I'm curious on from your end, and this question came in on the chat. I want to discuss it. How do you help other team members to fully understand the meaning of the composite scoring, especially those who are math phobic?
Oh, I love that question, and so does Flo, because she's going to show us.
Oh,
So,
hey.
yeah.
A little too quick. Spoiler alert. Sorry about that. I'll get out of the way. Let's go back.
No, we love it. We like questions, Eddie. You stay right in there.
All right. Oh, I'm still sharing?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. That's my fault. That's the engineer in the background that's pushing too many buttons. So we'll get back to you, Flo.
You know, that's all good. Can you bring us Yifan now? I think we're ready to interview her. This is the really exciting part. Hi, Yifan. How are
Hello.
you?
Good.
Welcome to the fun part where everyone gets to see us. So, we want to talk to Yifan today. Yifan works for the Michael J. Fox Foundation, as was said, and she is the director of revenue analytics at the foundation. And she worked with us last year to create a composite score based on company data. She was also a finalist for the Domo Ovation Awards in overall excellence. So that was very exciting. So she's going to talk to us about her experience leveraging data reduction techniques and how to create this composite score, the process of creating this composite score. And we're just really excited to have her here. She is not just one of my favorite customers, she's one of my favorite people, I dare say. So just really happy to be here. So Yifan, can you, just to begin, tell us a little bit more about the Michael J. Fox Foundation and your role at this foundation?
Of course. Thank you, Flo. So the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research is a nonprofit organization launched in 2000 by actor Michael J. Fox. So our mission is to fund research and drug development to better understand the underlying cause of Parkinson's disease and ultimately find a cure. So we also work to raise awareness of the disease and support those living with Parkinson's. So since inception, we have funded over $1 billion in high-impact Parkinson's research programs. So as the data analyst for the fundraising operation team, my role is to use Domo to track fundraising performance and innovate the operational functions of the foundation. So the goal is to efficiently grow our fundraising revenue to enhance the foundation's ability to support research and individuals living with Parkinson's.
Great. Thank you so much for that context. I think it's really useful for people to know kind of what the overarching goals are for the company. Yep. And last year, you and other team members from the analytics side worked with our team, the data science professional services team, to create a composite score. Now, the specifics of the score are proprietary, so we won't get into details about your use case or about the composite score here today. But just to give audience members an idea of how the composite score creation process went, could you start telling us why the foundation felt the need to have a composite score in the first place and what challenges you were facing that required this composite score to be created?
Sure. So we use Salesforce as our CRM, and it contains multiple objects. So each with many different fields, including customized ones. So we have fundraising related data since 2000. And this results in hundreds of thousands of columns and millions rows of data. So we are looking to create a composite score to combine multiple metrics and indicators into a single score that can provide a more comprehensive overview without clicking into different objects to gather information.
Yeah, I mean, hundreds of thousands of columns. That is, I mean, sort of a dream for a data scientist, but also a nightmare. So that was a fun one. What was the end goal of creating this composite score? What did you want to use it for? What did you want to do with it in your company?
Yeah, so the end goal of creating a composite score is to provide the fundraising team with a one-stop shop solution to better understand our audience and also improve the communication strategies. So by incorporating the score into our targeted campaigns, we can use the data insights to allocate resources more effectively. So we wanted to make sure the score is easily interpretable and consistent across different users, so we all have a better understanding of like which each score means.
Yeah, that's really useful about a composite score, right? Just having a consistent understanding of what the scores represent across the organization. I think that's one of the key things about composite scores that makes them so powerful. So now that we understand why the foundation needed this composite score and what you hope to do with it and how to use it, let's dive into talking about the process of how you created that score. What did you do first? How did you start?
So we work with the Domo Data Science team to develop the conceptual model and metric map. So this is a very helpful process to brainstorm and identify what features are relevant to the composite score. So at that time, we looked through all the data sets and created a list of relevant variables that could potentially be summarized and included in the composite score. So this was a pretty intense thinking exercise rather than a coding exercise. So like basically thinking conceptually about what variables would fall under and what the score should capture. We also consulted with our stakeholders to gather their input and ask them to send over the variables they felt should be included in the score based on their intuition and field of expertise. So we ended up with a list of about 250 variables that we thought might be useful in creating the composite score.
250, still quite a few, huh? We'll come back to how you included the stakeholders in the conversation. I think that's definitely worth returning to. But you mentioned the development of a conceptual model and a metric map. Shelby is on the data science team here. I'm wondering if, Shelby, you could expound a little bit on what the conceptual model is and what the metric map is and why are they useful when doing this data reduction exercise?
Sure. So I like to think of the conceptual model as a brainstorming exercise. It's a chance for you and your team to think about and identify the overall topic of your composite score, things like customer engagement or customer satisfaction. What's the main idea? And then it's also a chance for you to brainstorm about the various components that are going to comprise this score. So you want to be thinking, ideally, what do I want this composite score to capture? And then you simply write down and map out all of these underlying concepts that you want to make up the composite score. So the point of the conceptual model is really for your composite score creation to be guided by theory and business logic, not the data that you currently have available. We refer to this as kind of blue sky thinking. In an ideal world, what should this score look like? Then, once you've completed the conceptual model, we have our clients do something called a metric map. And a metric map is the place where we actually link these components of the composite score to the data that you have available. So to give an example of this, let's say, again, I want to measure store performance. And one of my measures of store performance is the amount of employee turnover. So in the metric map, we would go through and say, okay, we want to look at employee turnover as part of our composite score. Do we actually have a measure of this? If so, where is it in Domo? Is it cleaned up? Is it coded correctly, etc.? So just in summary, that's us linking our conceptual ideas of the score to the actual data that we have. And I know I just explained a lot and it can be kind of hard to visualize. So at the end of this webinar, we'll be sharing our slide deck, and we have examples of a template or a conceptual model and a metric map that you all can look at and reference and iterate on.
That's awesome. Thanks, Shelby.
Yeah, no problem. So I want to follow up with Yifan about how they had still 250 variables that they were thinking of making a composite score out of. And as a spoiler alert, I know we didn't end up using all 250 variables in the composite score. We went through and we eliminated quite a few of them. So Yifan, could you tell us more about why certain variables were eliminated in our process?
Sure. So we first confirm the definition of the composite score, and then eliminate variables that were not related to this concept we were trying to capture. So we also discussed with the Domo Data Science team on how to deal with missing data, like for example, variables that were only measured during a limited time frame or for certain observations. So we analyzed the quality of the data and discuss any variables that were uncertain. So internally, we consulted with different stakeholders at the foundation to get guidance on like which variables may not be useful, needed, or may be problematic due to measurement practices or lack of reliability. So also determine like which variables were accurate and then should be used as the input for the composite score. So for example, we had initially included both email click rate and open rate as variables of the score. But after talking to our email team, we learned that we should only use click rate here because of the Apple iOS privacy policy that was released at the end of 2021. So this policy allows users to have the option to block the email providers from seeing whether they open an email or not. So open rate is no longer a reliable source of information. So therefore, we removed open rate as a variable from the composite score.
Yeah, and to build on what you just explained, Yifan, I remember this process. I was one of the consultants who worked with MJFF, and the process of going through these list of variables and considering each variable one by one and whether it should really be included in the composite score or not, this took multiple meetings over multiple weeks, and I'm not going to lie, it can get kind of tedious. But I really think that this process is probably the most important step of the whole composite score creation. Because as we like to say as a data science team, garbage in, garbage out. So if you start off with the wrong variables, there's really no point in continuing on with a composite score because you're just going to get garbage back out. That's just to reiterate the importance of really thinking hard about what variables are going into your score. So Yifan, in the end, I remember that we decided that approximately 50 variables really reliably reflected the concepts that we were wanting to capture in our composite score. And importantly, we noticed that these 50 variables could be further categorized into specific subgroups. And that's when we realized that creating sub-composite scores as part of the composite scores might be really beneficial. So could you talk with us further about those composite scores and why they were useful?
Yeah, so during that process, I coordinated several sessions to facilitate discussions between the data science team and also the representatives from various departments within the fundraising team. So the goal here was to understand how each team planned to use the composite score and also get their feedback on the selected variables. So one key input we received from stakeholders was the need for greater granularity. So like if the overall score is high, they wanted to know which factors were driving that result. So to address this, we decided to create 4 subscores, each measuring a different aspect of the overall score. So by having multiple subscores, we could provide more detailed information that could be utilized by different departments for their specific needs, such as targeted campaigns. And also having those subscores allowed us to analyze the relationship between them and understand the drivers behind.
Okay. And I remember, I think we ended up coming up with 4 subscores, I think, right? That were really useful in kind of parsing apart the different concepts that we were trying to measure with your composite score. So I kind of want to turn the direction now of the conversation to how we combined the variables into a composite score and subscore. As we mentioned at the beginning of this Lunch and Learn, there are a lot of methods or ways to do data reduction or composite score creation. Yifan, what specific method did you guys choose to use and why?
So we wanted the score and their values to be interpretable and very easy to understand for business users in terms of like why someone received a high or low score. So we also wanted the scoring system to be flexible enough to accommodate changes such as adding or removing variables, and also easy for data analysts to maintain. So that eliminates some methods. And after talking to different stakeholders, we realized that they had their own views on what constituted a higher score or lower score based on their business knowledge and operational needs. So we developed logic-based rules on how to combine variables to create subscores and how to aggregate subscores to create the composite score.
Hey, Shelby, before we move on, I want to touch on this comment because a lot of folks are also asking as well. And we're trying to star some of these so that we make sure we have them during the Q&A. And I hate to throw you off a little bit here, but it says here that you mentioned 50 categories. Is that a lot in your experience? How many categories do you find to be kind of creating composite scores? Is probably a question for the group, but also keep on here.
I actually think
I'm going to...
The 50, it's not 50 categories, it's 50 columns, right? It's 50 variables. And then you synthesize those down into a smaller number of categories. 50 is pretty on par with normal. That's very, very average. I've seen them go as many as 500, and I've seen them with as few as 10. So it's very dependent on the business problem and how you want to solve it. But you can do this with large numbers of columns and just a handful of them as well.
What Christy said. Yes.
Great explanation, Christy. Going back to this idea of using logic-based rules to compile the composite scores, another spoiler alert, Flo's going to be doing a demo after this where she actually walks us through an example of these logic-based rules. But for now, Flo, really quick, could you just provide a quick overview of what are logic-based rules so we have that understanding?
Yeah, we'll go into more detail later, as you said, as part of the demo, but logic-based rules are very common in creating composite scores. It's really the process of evaluating the different combinations of attributes across the different columns, right? So say we have 5 columns, it's looking at the possible combination of those different attributes and characteristics and deciding where those combinations of attributes fall on this composite score scale. So say for the demo, for example, we'll have a very low to very high scale. It would be the process of going through these categories and deciding, okay, this one looks like it's a very low, this one's a very high. And then once those combinations of attributes have been assessed and the thresholds or cutoffs have been established, then it's really a matter of creating logical statements using if this, then that statements, right? And we can build in and or requirements, right? So this grouping of attributes falls under very high, but this other combination of attributes also falls under very high. We then convert those logical statements into formulas using SQL or Python or R. And that's how we assign those categories for composite scores. So that's kind of a high level overview of that. But Yifan, I remember I was also a consultant on this solution, and I remember that certain variables and certain subscores that we created captured more crucial aspects of the composite score than others, and that was the feedback that we got from the stakeholders that we talked to. How did you handle that when creating a composite score?
Yes, so we received valuable feedback from stakeholders under different departments, which help us to assign higher weight to more important variables. So during the discussion with the Domo Data Science team and the representatives from different departments within the fundraising team, one of the questions we wanted to understand was which variables matter more compared to others. So their expertise in different subscore concepts allowed us to assign appropriate weights to different variables, ensuring that the composite score accurately reflected the relative importance of each variable.
That's great. And you're talking about this relative importance of each variable, right? And that was determined by those conversations with those stakeholders. That was something really, really smart that your team did during our engagement, is that after we had come up with this, first pass at rules or guidelines for assigning scores, you went around to other teams at the foundation and you got their feedback and you incorporated their feedback. And I guess we're just wondering, why was that feedback so important to your team? Because we had a lot of those meetings. That was weeks also of meeting with stakeholders, and it was a lot of time invested, but it was worth it.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to involve stakeholders in different stages of the project when creating composite score. Since they are the end users of the score, we wanted to build something that meets their needs and goals. So involving them in the process ensured that their feedback was collected and considered, and the result was more likely to be something they are comfortable and confident using. So, and also it will be easier to get their buy-in and support. And this process also got the project on their radar and allow them to start scoping how they plan to use it, which can increase usage and drive adoption.
I love that. That idea that, if if the stakeholders don't, give you that feedback and give you that, those ideas of how they're going to use the score, then they are less likely to use it. So you're really just driving value by getting this feedback from them. And you talked about end users. So once the scores were finalized, how did you visualize the results? How did you disseminate the composite score results with the stakeholders at the foundation?
Yes, so we work with the data science team to create 3 dashboards to put the composite score into production. So our first dashboard was a page that explained the description of the scores. That includes all the rules of each score and background information on the variables we included, like why we chose them and their weight. So this dashboard was designed to be self-served for team members, so they can access the information they needed, review the rules, and also provide feedback or suggest any changes. So this approach provided transparency and information sharing to everyone involved. So the second dashboard displayed the interactive tables with filters on the top of the page. So this enables teams to select segments and explore or export them to use in the targeted campaigns. So this dashboard was intended to be used by teams to navigate through the scores, helping them to understand which constituent has a higher score and why. So the third dashboard was designed as a summary of figures. So this displays how many constituents fell under each score, so teams could use this information to plan campaigns or communicate with them. So having these dashboards was beneficial for sharing information and also increasing the self-sufficiency among teams.
That's great. It's really nice to hear just kind of how the solution really addressed the problems that you had at first, right? Of, you were able to boil down all these columns of data to 3 dashboards that users across the organization felt comfortable utilizing, right? Because they were straightforward, they were user-friendly, they were easy to navigate. So that's really, well, validating. We'll go that way. Shelby, do you have any more questions for Yifan?
Well, we did have another question come in through the chat. Since we have her, let's utilize her. So the question came from our good friend Alexis Lorenz. How do you manage variations of data point availability between platforms? Do you have to go with the least common denominator, or have you found ways to use the best of all without throwing off your results? Oh no, we've stumped her.
Oh, Yifan, I think that's for you.
I think.
Oh, sorry.
Alexis, you and I are going to be friends.
Sorry.
I
know. Very good friends. Yes, I agree.
Yeah. I'll get your email address later.
Sorry, I thought it was for the data science team. Can you please say the questions again?
Absolutely. Yifan, Alexis Lorenz asked, how do you manage variations of data point availability between platforms? Do you have to go with the least common denominator, or have you found ways to use the best of all without throwing off the results?
So we kind of take the latter approach. So we basically go through all the data, data available, data points available in our database. And then internally, we first brainstorm some fields we think will be useful for this composite score. And then we work with the data science team to select some variable that is most relevant, and then we will share with our stakeholders and let them know, okay, those are the variables we chose, and then they can provide any feedback, and then we will just update, optimize based on their feedback. So it's like a whole process, and we want to make sure we cover all the data points we have so we don't lose anything. But as I mentioned before, I think this logic-based role is very flexible. So let's say in the future, we figure out this variable doesn't work anymore, we can just switch it to something new or a more useful one. And for this project, we do want to track the performance using dashboards available. So we want to measure if this score works or not. If it's not, we will do some updates to make sure it is valuable in suggesting our communication strategy. Yeah, hope that is helpful.
I like that Yifan pointing out that. Oh,
go ahead.
Sorry. I like that you pointed out that it's never done. So you start using it and you realize, oh, this variable isn't working, or we left something out. You can constantly iterate and get better. That's the great part about data science. I think to wrap up the interview, we wanted to ask Yifan, in closing, do you have any other words of advice for individuals or teams interested in creating composite scores?
Sorry, is that my connection? I kind of lost the last question.
Oh,
hello?
You're fine.
Oh, no.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah,
I can hear you now.
Hear me?
Sorry.
Great. Just
I
a short
lost connection for
I asked
okay.
I asked just in closing, any advice you want to share with the people on the webinar about creating composite scores?
Oh, sure. So I think the data reduction techniques can be valuable for individuals or teams with a significant amount of data to analyze and are interested in creating composite scores. So my recommendation is to involve stakeholders in the process to ensure we are aligned with their needs and goals. And also it's important to choose appropriate data reduction techniques and create user-friendly dashboards to increase adoption. And finally, putting the score into usage and regularly tracking results can be very helpful for optimization and improvement.
Great.
Great.
Well, thank you for that summary, Yifan, and that advice was really good. We're glad that you came and talked with us today, and we're grateful to have worked with you as a data science team, and thanks for sharing your insights.
Cool. Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll say bye to Yifan for now. I do want to note that we have a summary slide in our slides that we'll be sharing at the end of this webinar of the 5 steps for creating a composite score very succinctly in one slide that you all can review that we just discussed with Yifan. But now I want to turn it over to Flo for the demo, which I know everyone is super excited about.
Yeah, I don't want
And the
anybody
demo
to think,
is
thanks, Shelby. I don't want anybody to think that this is over because it's not over.
We're not done.
We still got about 15 minutes left, and Flo's going to give you a demo, kind of an interesting way to format the session, right? To have an interview in the middle, and then some people are saying thank you. No, don't go anywhere. There's plenty more left from Florencian team. So I just wanted to call that out. We have some questions. We're going to save some of those for the question and answer session. So stick with us.
Alrighty, I will be doing the demo now. So I'm going to present, share screen. Okay. All right, everyone. Is my screen being shown? Yes. Excellent. Okay.
looks good, Flo.
It looks good. You see it? Excellent. So this demo is for a marketing ad campaign effectiveness use case. So this fictional customer, the Mountain Valley Times, they are a huge deal. Just because the mountains doesn't mean that it's happening in Utah. They influence so much. They want to assess how well different marketing ad campaigns are performing across the different platforms in which they have their marketing campaigns. They have ads on their fictional website, themountainvalleytimes.com. Please don't look that up because I don't know what will pop up. But again, fictional website. They also have ads in the mass emails that they send to subscribers. They have ads in their app, and they have paid for advertisements to be shown across social media platforms. So this customer had dozens and dozens of data columns for the different marketing ad campaigns, all coming from different reporting sources. And what they wanted to do was to quickly assess how effective each campaign was within each platform, and then also overall. So we started out, of course, with a conceptual model exercise, which you will all have access to that slide in the deck. It's a really useful exercise for bucketing all the columns into the different platforms and organizing your data and seeing what you have and what you don't have with the metric map. So after that process, we evaluated the data through some exploratory data analysis and some statistical analyses, and we narrowed the data down to about 24 features. So a lot fewer features than we had to start with. Now, because again, the customer wanted to be able to evaluate the effectiveness of the campaign across each of the different platforms, which are, again, website, app, email, and social media, we created a sub-score for each of the platforms. We then aggregated that up to a summary composite score or an overall summary score. So let's go into the score descriptions. This is one of the dashboards that Yifan described that she had, where they had very clear definitions of what each of the scores meant for their logical based score creation. It's not uncommon to use different formulas to create the different scores, because scores should be created guided by what the features represent, what the data looks like, and of course, business logic. And it's also very common, and I would argue good business practice, to use industry standards to guide some of the rules for your scores, right? So there's no shame in borrowing cutoffs or thresholds for commonly used scales. It allows you to contextualize your data a little bit. So that's just a little bit of context for that. That's all just to say that we use different formulas for the different scores that we created. So let's just look at this app score description. This score was created, again, using logic-based rules, which really just means that we came up with rules for each category from very low to very high based off of business logic coupled with statistical analyses. And we then applied those rules to the different campaigns, and we assigned the corresponding score using this if X, then Y approach. So as you can see here, for the very high, for example, in the app score, the app click rate had to be greater than 20 and the app conversion rate had to be greater than 3. regardless of views. For the high category, and here, let me make this bigger. The app click rate had to be between 9 and 20, coupled with a conversion rate that was more than 3, or there's a different pathway to be in the high category. The app click rate could be less than 9, but the app conversion had to be greater than 3. So that's just providing some examples of how you can use and/or statements within this if-then logical statement approach that we use to create scores. Now, it's possible that, we only considered 3 different columns to create this app score, right? We considered the views, the click rate, and the conversion rate. Someone brought up 50. An easier way to handle creating a composite score when you have a lot more columns is to use a point-based system. So for example, for our social media platform, let me go back to this, sorry. We wanted to create, again, a very low to very high scale. We want to keep the scales consistent across all the scores, but we had a lot of we wanted to include 5 features, which doesn't seem like a lot, but once you start thinking about how many possible categories you have within each of the features, it adds up to a lot of possible combinations, right? So for shares, we have 4 categories. For views, we have 5. For clear rate, we have 5. For awareness, we have 4. Once you come up with all those combinations, it would be a lot of work to go through and evaluate every single combination and then assign it to a category of very low to very high. So what we did instead is we created a point system where we reward higher effectiveness or higher behavior, right? So for shares, if the shares are greater than 15%, then we assign 5 points. If it's 0%, we assign 0. And this is what we do with all the different features. We then add that up and create a combined point score that we then divide by 5 because that's how many features we had. And then we assign score categories using this. So this is just when you have more features, the point system may be a better option than the logic-based approach. We then created a composite score based on the 4 subscores. So for the score, we took a simple equal weighing approach and converted the 5-point very low to very high scale from these subscores to a 1 through 5 numerical scale. We then added all of those up and divided that by 4 because that's how many subscore categories we have. And then we assigned the composite effectiveness score. Now, again, we used an equal weighing approach for this one. It's possible to assign different weights to different scores. So for example, say that the Mountain Valley Times is looking to move away from ads in their emails because that's really costly and because it's not effective and people just don't seem to respond well to those. They also think that social media advertising is really hot right now. And so they want to account for the social media platform effectiveness more in their summary metric. We could apply multipliers to the different scores in the calculation of the summary score in order to apply appropriate weights. So that is driven by business logic. So the subscores are really, really helpful to have. As Yifan said, in talking to stakeholders, we learned that different teams value different things differently. So they wanted the composite score, the final composite score, to be calculated slightly differently, just because of what they valued. So the subscores is something that they were able to use that was relevant directly to what they were doing. So this is really the score descriptions dashboard. It's really useful, and it's, I would say, definitely the first place that people should go to understand a composite score and what they represent. We then have our main composite scores dashboard, and here we just have, tables. I know tables are not everyone's favorite. They're not the most conducive to understanding what's happening at a high level, but they are, as a data scientist, I love tables, so I'm biased, but they provide a lot of really helpful information, right? So here we have the campaign ID, so the marketing ad campaign. Then we have their composite score, and then we have the 4 subscores that make up that composite score. We also have a version of these tables for each of the subscores. So for example, for email, we have the email score for each campaign, along with the 3 components that were considered in creating the subscore. And we have that for all of them. So it's just a really useful way to, if someone is really interested in the social media score and they want to understand why a campaign was very low, they just have to go in here and they can see on that row what was driving the score. And of course, with Domo, it's really easy to filter, right? So if we want to focus on the very high, we have 22 campaigns that were very high. We see here how different combinations of subscores still result in very high. So we have some campaign here that's moderate, and then very high, very high, very high. And then we have a very high, moderate, very high, high. So all of these combinations can still translate into very high. Stunning dashboard. Why, thank you. I did not come up with the color scheme. I have Steven to thank for that. He's been responding there. And lastly, of course, it wouldn't be Domo if we didn't build some sort of analytics on top of this, right? So here we just have some basic features about the ad campaigns that we want to evaluate, right? So for example, say we have, whether or not they have a video in the campaign, whether or not it's interactive, what industry it's from, and the main ad color. And say we're interested, we just as a point of reference, 60% roughly have videos, or 60% don't, and 75% don't have interactions. If we look at the very high composite score, we see that 60% are interactive. So we know that this interaction is working for a higher effectiveness score overall. Say we're also interested in comparing, the color for social media. So we look at the very, very low. What's not performing well? Purple, yellow, blue. Stay away from those colors, apparently, on social media. Well, we compare that to the high and very high, crimson. So this is something that you can just tell your marketing campaign managers, you know what, stay away from purple, yellow, and blue. That's not working well. We're going to stick with crimson because that seems to have a higher effectiveness score. So that's just a really quick run through of this demo. We are happy to chat about demos anytime because we love them. So with that, I will stop sharing.
It was going so well. I'm watching the comments. Everybody's like, this is fantastic. This is great. And then I realize, we are running up. We're running up close on time. Fast and furious here on the Community April Virtual Meetup. Obviously, we thank so many people for joining us. We do want to keep this going. We have some questions we want to get to. But before people start jumping off, because we're coming up on the hour, and that's kind of what we promised you, we are going to go a little bit over because we do have some questions that we want to ask. But before we do that, we're going to have a ton of links floating in the chat very shortly. One for this session's feedback. So we do have a survey that we'd love everybody that's still with us to take. Also, we'll put the link to register for our May Community Virtual Meetup, where we'll be doing some deep dives into beast modes, data sets, and ETLs. But stick around because we're not done yet. We've got some Q&A to get to. Let me bring Yifan back in here. We've got some people back in the chat as well. Let's see if we can start a few of these. I always love this question because I think it really speaks to, do I even have the time to jump into this if this is something I'm not even thinking about? So I'm interested in this question specifically. How do you, nope, that's not the right one. Sorry, let me go back. There was one about time, right? And I think it's actually kind of changed, I believe, since I got in here. But what does this kind of look like start to finish? If I'm going to jump in today and start working with these composite scores, what kind of time commitment am I looking at and try to build this out from start to finish for the panel, essentially, to answer that?
Depends on how clean your data is. That's always the first pass. How ready is your data?
Let's say it's ready. Let's say I'm ready to go.
Let's say you're ready to go. Well, Christy can probably provide more color to this, but I know our standard solutions are about 12 weeks after we have the data just for the, for a single model. So that's kind of the first answer, but the composite scores can take a long time because in a lot of ways they are a very thinking type of engagement, right? Like it's a big process of conceptualizing data and understanding it. So it's less straightforward than just putting it through, a standardized code. So yeah, it's never clean enough. Yeah.
I love all of those comments about it's never clean enough. Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. We have people tell us, our data is so clean, it's great. And we get into it and no, it's not.
was playing the part of the delusional data scientist, right?
We like delusional data scientists. Eddie.
I like this question. How do you manage correlation versus causation when dealing with what to score and how to weight it?
I think that's a really good question. I think the first thing to remember about data science is you very rarely have causation. And when you're putting together a composite score, the first threshold you have to pass is timing. Does one thing happen before the other thing? And if you don't know the answer to that, there's no way you're going to get to causation ever.
Yeah.
And a lot of times correlation is enough. Causation is a very, very high benchmark. It's one we love. Like I personally would love to set standards where I'm only doing data science about causation, but we would never get any business done if that were the case. That's a really high bar. So if you have time order, you may be able to at least imply causation. If you don't, forget about it and let's go for correlation. We like to think about data science as being iterative, and our first successful engagement for us is number one, did we find out things that we didn't know before? Number two, is it useful? And number three, do we know what we have to do different in the future to have better data? Those are a successful engagement. So you always want to know where you can go forward after that. And causation is a high bar that you're always striving towards, in my opinion, at least.
Awesome. Let's touch upon this one. When creating a point system, what are some common practices, some best practices from the team? This one's 0 to 10, 0 to 5, 0 to 100. We say 5 stars. We got a saying in my house, whether we're trying new foods or say giving that 5 stars, or a small star. Is everybody around the table giving the 5 star? What do you guys think? What's the best practice in creating a point system?
I think the best practice is what's driven by business logic, right? Whatever, if you need more granularity because of your use case, then have a more granular scale. That would be my response. Shelby, you were going to say something though.
Yeah, I would say in my experience, a smaller scale like 0 to 5 is going to be easier to interpret and easier for people to understand. But if having the ability to have wide variation or spread in what values the score can take on is important to you, then I would suggest going up to something more like 0 to 100.
There's I could teach you a whole semester-long college course on this. So without diving into the weeds, I will not do that right now. But without diving into the weeds, I think those are really good ideas to remember when you're creating scores.
Absolutely. Any best practices for normalizing the data scales from our friend Dan Court?
Please normalize data. That's my thought.
Was that a mic?
Normalizing data is a good idea.
Was that a mic drop moment? I feel like. What best practices would you suggest with data sets driven by dates and statuses? Sorry, that is not statues. That is statuses.
Oh, I like statues. Especially when they have dates on them. I don't know.
Okay. All right. We'll go with that as well.
We love data sets that are driven by dates. Because what that means is that you have a longitudinal data set and you can do more with time series data than you can do with anything else. And you have a lot of predictive power in that. So we love them. We absolutely love them. However, it creates a lot of complications when you start doing your analysis. So my first step, I think, would be to educate yourself or come and work with us either way on what it means to do longitudinal data analysis and some of the tips and tricks that data scientists use to navigate that to get the very best possible, to make your data and your data sets work for you in the best possible way.
Love that. Thank you guys so much. There's been so much to chat about. Before I let you go, I'm going to bring in my good friend Mark Booth, also Anna Yardley, community manager. I'm just going to throw these. There's no camera here, but let me show you the amount of people that are in the back end of this community April virtual meetup to help. Vishaka, Brian, Steven, thank you guys so much for handling on the comments. Big round of applause for them. Lots of comments for them helping manage this chat session. Oh my goodness, what a day it has been. Mark is usually the guy I go to for who in the world should get their hands on these Domo branded AirPods Pros.
So first things first, it looks, Flo, Shelby, team, I mean, the queen, of course, we'll just call her the queen, Christy, of course. It looks like you've already been invited back to a future session because they want something on time series data. So
And I want to do that. We'll prepare tomorrow. Yes, we'll start
tomorrow.
Preparing tomorrow, everyone. Okay, here are our winners for the day. And I apologize because I know that I'll massacre some names right now. This one I will not. John has been super, super engaged throughout. John, where are you at? Eddie, we got to get Eddie to turn off his fingers for a minute there so he stops clicking buttons. John, winner number one. There's a pair of AirPod Pros that are on their way to you. Number two on this list, if you are still here by chance, and I don't know how to pronounce it, so I won't try. But that's our second winner.
I agree.
That's our second winner. Both super, super engaged today. Thanks for joining. Eddie, back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of them been asking, all of these sessions are recorded. They are available on demand at the link that you actually registered at. So as soon as we're finished, as soon as we end the broadcast, click that link again. Boom, you'll be watching the recording. You can share that recording with others. We've also shared the survey feedback. And if you want to throw that again in the chat, survey link. The link to our May virtual meetup, which again is also jam-packed. We're trying to do as best we can to manage expectations of beginner users to advanced users. We know there are lots of learning modalities out there. So we're going to be doing some deep diving into beast modes, data sets, ETLs with internal candidates like Zach Cameron, Michael Christensen, and then externally our Domo customer at NLC Mutual, Mark Snodgrass, who is one of our absolute rock stars on the community. If you haven't yet, community-forums.domo.com. That's where all of this engagement happens every day. Big shout out to our customer today, Yvonne. Love this whole thing. Super cool to see how a nonprofit has successfully used data science concepts and tools. Really encouraging. So we'll end with that. Thanks everybody for joining us. We will catch you on the next one in May, or we'll find you on our Lunch and Learn live streams Tuesdays and Thursdays on a regular schedule.
Eddie Small. Before we quit, everyone, I apologize for doing this to you, Alexis, but it happens to be Alexis's birthday today.
Oh.
If you don't know Alexis,
yes,
she's brilliant and amazing and super, super engaged in all things Domo community. If you're not engaged in the forum, go get engaged today. You'll see lots of Alexis in there. So, Alexis, I would sing to you right now, but I would get fired. And Christy and Flo and Shelby would never do another one of these, and I'm not prepared to make that happen. So just know that Domo and everyone here says happy birthday, dear friend. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. All right. We'll join you on the next one.